Welcome to Right On with Tom Fallwell, a bi-weekly podcast focusing on interviews, novels, reviews, and upcoming releases from indie authors. Now, here's Tom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of my podcast. This episode, I have with me the author M.L. Spencer, and I will be talking with her about her books in her Rinmore Saga series. I also have a book reading and a couple of reviews for you, and some news about a great event coming up in October. The event is the Virtual Fantasy Con 2017, an annual online book convention for authors, books, and publishing services centered around the fantasy and science fiction genres. This convention is held on Facebook and will begin October 15th and run through the entire week until October 21st. There will be many authors, editors, cover designers, and more participating, and if you are a reader, I highly recommend you attend. You are sure to find some new books to read, and there will be plenty of giveaways and prizes to be had. Excitingly enough, I'm proud to say that the VFC 2017 awards were held this month in September, and the winners have already been announced. Surprisingly, for me, my podcast was nominated and voted the best fantasy podcast, and I'm quite thrilled to win the Gold Award, first place, for this category. I want to thank whoever nominated the podcast and thank all who cast their votes. This brings up something else I would like to share with you all. An event such as this requires many hours of labor, planning, and executing all that is necessary to put on such a fantastic event. There are many who work in the shadows, gaining little recognition or reward for their efforts. And this year, I was a witness to some of that firsthand. The awards segment of this event was handled mostly by a single person, who I saw work selflessly and spending many hours setting up the rules, running the nominations and voting, and even designing the badges for the winners of each place in every category. I witnessed the tremendous effort required to perform this task, and I have nothing but great admiration and respect for the woman that did all this out of the kindness of her heart. For this reason, I want to dedicate this podcast episode to that person, the wonderful author Aaron Michael Hall. While not everyone was able to take this event as it was meant as a fun and enjoyable time, and some caused much drama, I still think the final result, and the majority of the authors, designers, editors, and more that were involved fully appreciate her efforts. I know I do. So join me in showing some gratitude to her and to all those who work in the background to make this event as great as it is. Okay, I'm stepping down from my soapbox and continuing on with some reviews I think you'll enjoy, right after a word from one of our awesome sponsors. C.G. Blade's pseudoverse novels are a sarcastic look into mankind's race to develop the first conscious artificial intelligence and achieve singularity. The problem is that most of the runners in this race are sadistic, hell-bent on destruction of DNA as we know it, and have a fondness for those missing a Y chromosome. Why, you ask? From cobalt to crimson to emerald, this is one wild, mysterious roller coaster ride as a hidden puppet master is slowly but surely gaining ground on humankind. C.G.'s newest novel, Onyx, goes back 26 years before Cobalt and explains the beginning of it all. Will humanity finally become steady? Tropa is all around us now as heliotrope starts to take shape. We hope you enjoy this little slice of science fiction heaven which fuses historical science fiction, satire, horror, and plenty of hidden Easter eggs along the way. Join us in liberating the pseudos from Pseudosynth Press Publishing.
This review is for Talking Tales, Puppy's Bubble by Erica Graham. This was my favorite book in the Talking Tales series by far, not just because I love puppies, but because the verbiage was simple and age-appropriate, yet effective for the lessons that were being taught. This book covers the B, P, M, N, D, and H beginning sounds in a fun, engaging way that toddlers and preschoolers will enjoy. They will especially love the bubble popping page. Even I had fun reading that. I know my kids in care would have adored this book, and I look forward to sharing it with the little ones in my local schools and childcare programs very soon. I highly recommend this book for ages 5 and below by Erica Graham, Talking Tales, Puppy's Bubble. There are 3 books in this series, and I highly suggest you guys check them out. You can find more information about these books at readersreviewroom.com.
Before You Leap is most definitely a book I would recommend. I had a great time reading this book. Right off the bat, I could see that it was going to have some very fun moments, and I was not disappointed. It is a great story for both young and old alike. There are some great antics and miscommunication between the main character, Sean Kelly, and his future relative that make this a fun and exciting read. I was actually laughing aloud at some of the interactions and found the book had just the right amount of suspense and drama to keep me moving along with anticipation. It also gave me some in-depth reflection on relationships and emotional processes as Sean struggled with the situations he endured throughout. This book is a fantastic, fun read for readers of all ages and for readers of all genres, but it is definitely aimed at sci-fi lovers. Even so, the fun and suspense will please most any reader. I highly recommend this book, and I'm definitely going to continue reading the series. Now I have a book reading for you. This reading is for the newly released Wheelers of Rantha, Book 2, Queens, by Patrick Hodges. We featured this reading before, but the book has just released, and I thought it appropriate to feature it once again.
Time dragged on. Minutes stretched on interminably as the rain soaked the huntress's tunics to their very skin. Kilia's robe became heavy. She had no choice but to remove it, shivering in the chill wind. She cast a glance westward, straining her eyes, hoping to see the magnificent outline of the Talon streaking towards them, but saw only the vague shimmer of the sun, hiding behind a dense bank of clouds covering the horizon. A game. The most important game in all of creation will be decided here, on this remote patch of land. The fate of Elystra, of Earth, of countless others depends on us. A tiny flame engulfed her palms of her hands, which vanished as she clenched them into fist. To her right, Georgie pointed and screamed, "I see something!" Through the drizzling rain, a half-mile distant, they came. 20 men, riding their merrics like every demon in the fire realms was giving chase, thundered into view. Their chests and heads were covered in armor, and each man wielded a fearsome-looking longsword. It has begun. Arantha, protect us. Zarina! Kilia called, drawing the young wielder's gaze. You know what to do. The Calva-keeper faced the oncoming horde of merrics. She placed her hands against her temples, staring unblinkingly as she reached out with her mind. The merrics' reactions were nearly instantaneous. Several of them stopped dead, causing their riders to pitch forward and topple to the ground. Others stood on their hind legs, bucking the soldiers from their backs, while the remainder veered off in different directions, ignoring the riders' commands and kicks. 12 men, momentarily dazed from their fall, recovered both their wits and their swords. Grim-faced and determined, they resumed their advance on the plateau, a brisk stride at first, then a full-on sprint, screaming battle cries as they brandished their blades above their heads. "Georgie!" Kilia yelled. "Let us send our guest a greeting!" The fair-haired water-wielder smirked and held her hands out in front of her. Her arms moved with practiced ease, her palms surgical instruments as she manifested her powers. Kilia mimicked Yarji's gestures, and together, a large mass of water lifted from the river Ix. With a thrust of their hands, the two women transformed the hovering liquid into super-hot steam. In unison, they panned their hands to the right, wrapping the mist like a deadly blanket over the charging soldiers, who were now only 50 yards distant. The riders' armor, which covered their chest, torso and arms were designed to protect them from conventional things like arrows or even bladed weapons. However, they proved a detriment in the face of the wielder's fury. Not only did the scalding hot steam burn the exposed skin of their faces, forearms, and shins, but it heated the Masonite armor to a temperature that would sear the cloth of their tunics beneath it, as well as the skin beneath that. Several fell to the ground, their legs thrashing and twitching as they covered their faces with their hands. A few others, strong enough to endure the pain to remain standing, tugged at the clasp that held their armor together. Through sheer force of will, they managed to shed the armor, letting it fall to the muddy earth. By this time, the steam had dissipated into the atmosphere. Kilya and Yarji were unable to maintain it against the pelting rain and the wind, but it had done its job. The men had no sooner slogged off their armor when Ibina gave the huntresses the order to fire. Several dozen arrows ripped through the air as they flew en masse toward their targets. The meritless riders, still reeling from the previous attack, fell dead. Within seconds, the only signs of life displayed were spasmodic twitches from the few still drawing in their final breaths. The remaining attackers, having regained control of their mounts, rode away to report their comrades' fates to whomever commanded them. "Shall I stop them, Protectress?" Zarina called. "Save your energy, Zarina," Kilya said. "The day is young." A great whoop arose from the huntresses below. Yarji, Zarina, and even Nyla sported relieved smiles. They'd managed to stop the first wave with 0 Extrayu casualties. In fact, the enemy hadn't even come close. Kilya, however, remained reserved. For the first time in their long history, lives had ended at her sister's hands. At her hands. And it was only beginning. This has been an excerpt of Wilders of Arantha, Book 2, Queens, by Patrick Hodges.
You will find cover images and links to these books, both those reviewed and the reading, on the podcast page of my website. I encourage you to check them out. Now, let's get on to our featured guest author. I have with me today M.L. Spencer, the author of the Renwar Saga, which looks like a good set of books. As a matter of fact, I have them, but I haven't read them yet. So I would like you to welcome M.L. Spencer with us today and say hello and tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, hi, Tom. Nice to be on your show. Thank you very much. So, yeah, I'm M.L. Spencer, and I like to write fantasy. And the kind of fantasy that I like to write is considered to be grimdark fantasy, which kind of has to do with morally ambiguous protagonists and usually kind of a darker setting. And that's what I really like to write. I have 3 books out right now in the Renwar Saga. The first book is Darkstorm, and then Dark Mage, and then Dark Lands. If you're sensing a theme here, it's because, I guess because I'm trying to get a point across, everything's kind of dark. So,
well, so what gave you the idea for this? I mean, when did this concept come up?
A really long time ago. I honestly got the idea for the first novel back in the 90s, and it was written in 2002. What gave me the idea is I really wanted to do kind of a perspective switch on a character. I wanted to start a main character out with one perspective and then do a complete 180, just tear him down completely and then rebuild him again in complete opposition to what he stood for in the first place. And that's kind of what took me off down this road.
Well, I noticed in the first book, and like I said, I've got them on my Kindle, but I haven't read them yet. In the first book, it looks like it's about some brothers.
Yes, the first book, Darkstorm, is actually more of a prequel than it is really of book 1, and it occurs 1,000 years before the rest of the series, and it chronicles the events that kind of sets everything in motion for later on, and it deals with 2 brothers who operate from 2 extremely different perspectives, and they don't like each other at all. And it's kind of like a series of unfortunate events that results in an absolute catastrophic circumstance, which creates the problem for the rest of the series.
And then the main character in the other two is Darian, I think it was.
Right. Like I said, the rest of the series occurs 1,000 years later, and that is, my main protagonist, Darian Lachlan.
Okay. So you've got more books planned, not just 3.
I'm actually working on the wrap-up to the series. It's book 4.
Okay.
And it's going to be called Dark Rise.
Dark Rise?
Yes.
Okay. So you said you started on this a long time ago. Was there anything that kind of gave you the idea for this, or was it just something you wanted to do?
Like I said, I really just wanted to do a series where it really shows a perspective change. I've come a long way as a person, I think, since really starting on this series. So my reasons for writing have changed over the years. But definitely to begin with, I just really, really wanted to look at 2 types of moral perspectives and put them kind of in conflict with each other, and then have a main character kind of switch sides, start off on one side of the story and end up on the other, and show the validity of both sides.
Okay. Well, so in something, I guess, is there anything that you could tell us that would maybe entice a reader to pick up book 1 and get started? Is there?
Okay, something that would really entice a reader.
Yeah.
If you really like watching a complete train wreck, then this series is for you. Because this is a series that chronicles mostly one character, but in honest truth, 2 societies. And it just kind of shows a slow motion disaster in the happening, and kind of completely falling apart as far as just the entire world, the characters themselves, what they believe in, what they stand for, everything that matters for them is utterly demolished, but then redefined. And there's definitely strength in that redefinition. So if that sounds appealing to you, then the series might be for you.
I have to ask this because it makes me think of it so much. Have you read Elric of Melbourne?
No, I have not.
Oh, okay. Because that's kind of the approach that author took, and that's why it made me think of it. It's your anti-hero kind of thing. So.
Yeah, it's definitely an anti-hero driven series.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little about you then. Here's a question I've kind of wanted to ask an author, and I haven't asked one yet, so I'll ask you.
Okay.
Of the books that you've read, fantasy and science fiction, basically, what did you like best, and what did you like the least?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I think what I like best is a very well-developed world with well-developed characters inside that world. One of my absolute favorite series of all time that gets dogged on by a lot of people is Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. And I still love this series because it's an extraordinarily complex and well-developed world. Another great favorite of mine is Frank Herbert's Dune, for the same reason, and that's kind of more along a sci-fi fan kind of line there. But I think that what really draws me into these worlds is their characterization of just diverse cultures, and they're obviously very well researched and set in cultures that are of this world, and you can go there, you can live there, you can really get a feeling for what it's like to live in these worlds, and that's what draws me to them. So that's one thing I really like.
Okay.
One thing that I probably really do not like, and this is just me, a lot of people definitely would argue against it. I do really not like first-person point of view. A lot of people really love first-person point of view, but I have a hard time with it. If I pick up a book and it's first-person, most of the time I'll just put it down and walk away. And I think that's because I find first-person very limiting. All you really get is the story of one person's perspective, and that's great for a lot of stories, and I understand that. But I prefer to see multiple perspectives, multiple points of view, in the things that I read and really get a broader understanding of all the characters and their motivations.
Most of the first person's stories that I've read that I really liked, usually they were first person when that person was in the scene, but they would kind of take a third person point of view when that person wasn't in the scene.
That's actually, I haven't read a lot of stories like that. The one that really pops into mind that alternates between first person and third person would be Patrick Rothfuss's series, The Kingkiller Chronicles. But I haven't actually read a lot like that where it's alternating points of view.
There was a little bit of that in Amber Chronicles, and I kind of like that. I like the first person point of view in that particular series because you were the main character would wake up in with amnesia, so you didn't know anything, and you were learning right along with him, and it just kind of, I don't know, that drew me. But I most of what I've written has been third person too. So
yeah, I think it's, third person is pretty standard for the fantasy genre. Always kind of has been.
Do you have any grammatical pet peeves that drive you crazy?
I just really appreciate it when a book is well edited, definitely. I think there's nothing that drives me nuts more than opening a book up to the first page and finding just common spelling and grammatical errors. So I'm my second job, I'm a teacher. I'm a biology teacher. I'm not an English teacher, but I probably should have been because let me tell you, I can practically read with a red pencil in hand.
When you're kind of tell us how your typical writing day may go.
Okay, well, like I said, I do have another job. I teach, so I try to fit writing in around that. So
Okay.
that being said, I'll come home from work and I'll get right on the computer and I'll start typing. I try to knock out a chapter every couple of days. I usually spend one day outlining the chapter and doing dialogue. And then the next day I'll go in and I'll flesh it in with narrative. And I find it's a pretty good way that I avoid writer's block. And I can keep the pace with it pretty well.
See, that answered another question. Now we got that one out of the way.
Okay.
They always ask about writer's block.
Well, I still get it. Most of the time I get it because I've written myself into a tangle and I have a hard time untangling that tangle and finding a solution to the problem. So that does happen to me occasionally, and I've been blocked for weeks before I figured out a solution. Usually if I do figure one out, it just kind of spontaneously comes to me. I'll just be driving down the road and it kind of hits me, oh yeah, didn't think about that. Or I'll wake up one day and, oh yeah, there we go.
So are you a plotter or pantser? Both?
I am a plotter, very much a plotter. When I sit down to write something, I try to come up with one line that describes the entire work. From then I try to come up with a paragraph, and then from there I start outlining until I can have enough that I can actually summarize the entire book. Only then, when it sounds like a good story, will I sit down and start writing.
Okay. So you know how it's going to end before you start.
Yeah, definitely. If I don't know how it's end, I'm not going to waste my time because I'm so afraid of getting halfway through a novel and going, oh crap, I shouldn't have gone in that direction. I would never want that to happen.
Well, I guess it's a matter of preference because, I'm a pantser and I haven't had that problem yet. So.
Well, that's good. Definitely good. I see validity in both ways. I think that I prefer knowing where I'm headed. That way I can do things like drop in foreshadowing when it's needed and switch things up, and I can really anticipate a plot twist and try to start preparing things in that direction. I don't know how pantsers do it, honestly. I really don't. I think that you would have to kind of write it to go back and do all those things. I'm not sure. Maybe you can tell us.
Well, this ain't about me this time. This is about you. We'll talk about that another time. But yeah, I just sit down and start writing. I'm just a stenographer for the characters. So.
Okay, got you. No, I know what you're talking about there. I have had the occasional rebel character come along and say, no, I'm not doing it that way.
Yeah.
I'm doing it this way. And then I have to tear up half an outline. And I've done that, but then I'll actually sit down and I will outline out the rest of the novel. Okay, if you insist on doing it this way, I guess we'll do it. Tell me what you want.
How much research did you have to do for your Renmore saga?
Oh, I've done tons of research. I probably spend almost as much time researching as I spend actually writing, especially for the last book I wrote, Darklands, because that took place in an area where there's absolutely no sunlight. It's kind of like a magical nuclear winter happened. And so I had to kind of come up with a whole system for how people can survive in such an environment with food chains and ecosystems in the dark. And I had to devise an entire culture, which I based upon a real world Earth culture that I had to pretty heavily research. And that took a while.
So is there going to be a lot of research for the fourth book? Are you doing much on that?
Yeah, the fourth book is by far more heavily military investment than anything I've written before. There's a lot of battles. There's a lot of really big fighting action. There's sieges. So I've really had to do a lot of research on military tactics and battles and things like that, which I already knew a little bit about, definitely writing the rest of the series, but I've gotten far more in depth this time around.
Sure. Do you ever let other people read while you're working on something and read parts of it, or do you wait till you've got it ready for beta?
The only person I've really ever let read while I'm working on it is my husband. He's always read 2 steps behind me. This last book, though, I've decided not to do that because honestly, that's all he's ever read of me is my rough drafts. And so this last book that I'm writing, I told him, sorry, you're out. You can read the edited version.
Has he ever given you any feedback that surprised you?
Oh, absolutely. He's given me tons of wonderful feedback because he comes from a completely different perspective that I do. He was actually in the military at one point, and so he can actually come back to me and say, you know, you've got them doing this here. They have defilade. They'd be going in a different direction. Oh, really? Okay. And so he'll give me lots of wonderful pointers. I like it.
Have you always wanted to be a writer, or did it just kind of sneak up on you?
No, this is something I've really always wanted to do. I just wasn't quite sure how to go about it. I was writing books when I was probably in the 2nd or 3rd grade, little tiny things. I wrote probably my first novel-length piece of fiction at, I think I was about 13 years old. Even when I went to college, I knew better than to major in creative writing because I knew what my chances were. But I almost got a minor in it, and so that kind of helped out a lot. I'd always really kind of hoped that this would be something that I can get into. I never made it my primary job in life, but it's definitely been my passion and my hobby throughout my whole life.
So kind of tell us how your process and how you got around to being a self-published author.
Okay, well, like I said, I wrote my first novel in the Renmore saga, which is called Dark Mage, way back in 2002. And I actually wrote book 2 first. I know it's kind of weird, but it was actually at the time meant to be a standalone. I figured that if it was ever successful, I might do something more with it. But if it wasn't a success, hey, we'll stop here. I shopped it around. I tried to get agents. I tried to get published. It just didn't happen. It was ginormous. It was over 200,000 words. Nobody wanted that from a first-time author. And I failed completely. So I just, after a couple of years, I just gave up, shoved it in my closet, and never looked at it again until 2011. I was just talking to a coworker at work one day, and I'm like, yeah, I wrote a book. They're like, oh, let me read it. I'm like, oh, okay. So I drug it off, gave it to them, and they kind of came back, wow, you should really get this published. I'm like, maybe I should. And so I started actually kind of looking into self-publishing, and that's what I ended up doing with it, is I self-published it.
How have you found having to promote your own work? Has it been daunting?
Well, let me tell you, when I did self-publish Dark Mage in 2011, I had no idea that you actually had to promote the work. So it didn't do anything. It sat there on Amazon and completely flopped. I did not have a Facebook account at the time. I had no Twitter. I didn't even know what social media really was. It wasn't until a couple years later that I decided, I probably should be taking this author thing more seriously. And so I opened up my first Twitter account and my Facebook account and actually started reading some books on, how to be an author. Oh, I need to do this thing called marketing. What is that? Networking, you say? Hey, I am an INTJ. I'm an introvert. I don't know how to market. I don't know how to network. And let me tell you, I learned fast.
Well, that's good. I know what you're talking about. I was a total introvert, and now I've had to kind of come out of that shell. So it's quite a journey.
It is quite a journey. I will say it's easier to do on the internet for an introvert. It's easy for me to sit behind Facebook and type to people. It would be far easier than for me just getting out there and trying to work a crowd, for instance. That would be very stressful for me. But I've actually found that I like social media. I actually have a hard time staying off of it now. It's addicting.
So on your Renmore's books, which was there one that you think was the best so far?
Yeah, I really like Darklands the best. That's the last one I wrote.
Okay.
I like it the best because, again, that's where the perspective change really happens. That's where I think you could really find that you really look at the other side, see the enemy, and understand them. Mm-hmm. And that really that took a lot of work for me. Not only that, but I think my writing kind of developed to a point where it kind of got to where I wanted it to be in that book too.
Yeah. I was just thinking that it takes a few books to really find your style, basically.
Yeah, it does. I can't say that my voice has changed dramatically from book 1 to book 4. I still had the voice. It was already there. But what has changed is I got tighter as a writer. I'm limiting the adjectives, I'm limiting the adverbs, and I'm really working on using more powerful imagery. And that's really come along in the last 3 books.
That brings up another question I was thinking of is there something that you, a way that you write that you constantly have to go back and change because it's I don't know how to put this. Like for me, if I sit down and I write something and somebody reads it and I haven't even gone back to edit it or anything, they'll want to know how come everybody's nodding and smiling so much.
Oh, I do that all the time. My editor is on me about that. I'm constantly putting in character gestures all the time, narrating every single thing that goes on in the scene. It's like, of course they picked up the glass. They had to pick it up to drink it, didn't they? You don't have to describe every single character action that's made. Yeah, that's one of the things I have to kind of watch.
Yeah, so, I did the same thing. My editor got on to me one time. I had a line where a guy was growling angrily, and he goes, as opposed to growling what?
Yes.
Oh, okay, excuse me.
Yes, and I think another thing is I'm great about summarizing what I'm going to do before I actually do it. So I have to go back and kill all those wonderful things.
That where you describe what's going to happen and then have the character say what's going to happen. Wait a minute, we already knew that.
Yep. That's one of my downfalls right there. I'm getting better at it though. The more I write, the more I realize, oh, I just did that, didn't I? At the time, I was having to go back and kill it later.
Yeah, that's the way I see it. You start developing a style and becoming better. I mean, like anything, practice makes perfect.
Practice does make perfect. And I'll tell you what's really helped too is I've joined a couple of critique groups. And let me tell you, there's nothing more powerful than other people telling you exactly how wrong you are and where you went wrong.
Yeah.
They can find all of the problems. And it's actually really helped me to mature as a writer, having, people point out, hey, you're using this word over and over. You sure like this word. Oh, yeah, you're right. I do.
How much help have you found the indie author community on social media?
The indie author community on social media is indispensable for me. I have so much support. I can't even tell you. There's so many wonderful people on there, and it's like a hive mind of collective knowledge, and truly, not everybody knows everything, but if you get them all together, the wisdom on there is just extraordinary. So I would not survive as an author without them. I mean, there's people I go to when I want to laugh or cry, or, hey, how do you format this? Or, wow, this keyword isn't working for me correctly. What would you do? And, they're always there for me. I really haven't never had a bad experience with another author on the community. I know some people have. I personally have not, and I consider myself very fortunate so far.
Well, if I actually was talking with a guy this week who is an aspiring author. He hasn't published yet. And he was asking me a lot of questions, and I was telling him what I thought, but there's probably going to be some listening to this podcast. So maybe you'd like to give some advice to a writer who's looking to make it into the publishing world.
Okay, well, I guess if I had one piece of advice that I wish somebody would have told me back when I first started, I would have really appreciated it. That's get an editor. And get professional cover art. No matter how wonderful your writing is, nobody's going to care about it unless you look professional. And that really starts with getting the piece edited and a professional cover put on the novel. Other than that, branding. Branding is huge. Not only do you need to brand your work, you need to brand yourself. And you need to have a recognizable brand that people actually know and can trust. And so I think that's something you really need to start working on right from the beginning before you even push publish on Amazon. So I think those are the couple things that the two best pieces of advice I have for a new author.
I agree. I had the same problems.
I did too. Please don't ever go back and look at my the cover I put on my first.
I done pulled the first book I wrote off. It's not available no more. As a matter of fact, I rewrote it and just re-released it. So.
Oh, there you go. Excellent. Yeah, I had a couple of cover catastrophes before I finally got to where I am now.
So, anything before we go? Anything funny ever happened that you want to tell us about? A little anecdote or something we can enjoy?
Oh dear. Oh, I honestly I can't think of anything too funny at this moment. I'm sure it's just
anything disastrous.
Oh, I can think of plenty of disastrous things. Yeah, that's easy. Well, I think that the best piece of advice that I can give as far as disaster and how to avoid it is really just please make sure that people avoid any type of a publishing company that's asking you for money up front. If you go to a publisher or an agent and they start asking you to contribute, that's a red flag. And that's where you need to run. I know that back in 2002, when I was first trying to shop my work around, I went with an agent who asked for money. And I gave them money, and they said that they put my work out here, there, everywhere. And, it turns out they didn't, I just paid them money for nothing. And, that there's still predators like that around. And it's really unfortunate because they prey off people's dreams and hopes. And that's the worst kind of predation that's possible, in my opinion. So avoid those like the plague.
Okay. Well, we got a couple minutes left here, so I'm going to have the link to your Amazon author page and your books on the podcast page. But if there's some other places you'd like to tell us where they can connect with you and everything, just tell us how to get a hold of you there.
Sure. More than welcome to check out my website. That's at mlspencerfiction.com. I got some freebies you can download from there. Get in contact with me. I always love to have people join my newsletter. It's pretty interactive. I love it when people give me suggestions. I've got like little polls on you can vote for like what you want to see happen in the series, chances to name characters, stuff like that. So you can do that again from the website. I've also got a Twitter account if you want to follow me on Twitter. That's mlspencer1 on Twitter. And that's about it for as far as my social media. I'm on Instagram, but I got hacked. So we're taking a temporary break from Instagram for the moment until I can unsubscribe myself from 8,000 followers.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us today. When I get through here, I'll be talking with you again, so don't hang up. But I just want to thank you for being on the show and let everyone know that, again, I'll have links to be able to find your books and everything on the podcast page. And just a final thank you for being on Right On with Tom Fallwell.
And thank you, Tom, for having me on. It's been a really good time. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, bye-bye.
Are you a new indie artist looking for a way to market yourself? Maybe it's time to go indie now. Go Indie Now is an online platform that highlights, fosters, and supports indie artists of all art forms. Our shows on YouTube do everything they can to bring an audience to what you're doing. So head on over to goindienow.com, find our channel on YouTube by searching Go Indie Now, all one word, and remember, it's always time to go indie now. We'll see you there.
That's it for the show today. I'd like to remind any fantasy or sci-fi authors out there that you can submit an application to become a guest on the show. Submit news about new releases or events for us to share, or get a reading for your book in an upcoming episode by submitting the proper forms on my website. Just go to tomfallwell.com/podcast and you will find the appropriate buttons that will take you to the necessary forms. I hope you enjoyed this episode and will follow my podcast by subscribing to my YouTube channel. You will find a link to that also on the podcast page of my website. Thanks for listening, and until next time, right on.